contemplate the workings of the inner being. Your eyes are wide open, but are you really seeing?
Yay! Lee Noto is in the building.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, my name is Ta.
My name is Cole.
And we are Ta Cole, and this is
Mentor in the Mirror podcast. Your favorite COVID couple.
I'm not.
No, we don't have COVID.
Is that you and Lee?
No. What?
Oh.
That would, what?
I don't know what you're talking about, man.
That's what we're really talking about today.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm saying, can I watch?
No, my thing this week has now been that, like, when I make a comment about something, it's like, that was so pre-pandemic because everything's different now. So if someone asks me a question, I'm like, oh no, that's so pre-pandemic.
So last season.
So last year. Lee, so one thing I'd love to dive in with you today, for anyone that is just meeting you for the first time, you are a master of connecting with people and helping illuminate their personal intimacy and just the experience of getting to know themselves in relation to other people. At least that's my experience of you. So could you give a little bit of, just some context so as people are tuning in and watching, they can know a little bit about you before we dive into some more conversation?
Absolutely. Ooh, where to begin? So my favorite thing in the whole wide world is getting to know people and holding a space for them to get to know themselves in a way that they might not have thought possible. And that happens through multiple layers of intimacy with oneself, and then allowing someone in to that discovery and creating intimacy with others. So I really love looking at intimacy through the lens of play and pleasure, and also through the lens of communication and some of the things that we really have to roll our sleeves up for that cause us to really evolve and grow as humans.
So for those people who are very unfamiliar with the realm of intimacy, how would you define intimacy?
Ooh, sure. So intimacy, and here's what I'll say, and this is a confusion that I had for quite some time. I really confused intimacy and sexuality and sensuality and sex. So I thought for the longest time that in order to have intimacy with someone, that meant that we had to be in a romantic partnership and we were going to be having sex. And I only discovered in my late 20s that that wasn't actually the case. And so what I view intimacy as now is the ability to see others deeply, to understand them and to know them and to hold a space of unconditional love for them, and to allow others into my life to see me and know me in the same way with whatever may come up and out.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So in a time like now, I think that it's a huge opportunity for people to explore what intimacy even means to them, to the people in their life. Do you have any tools you're sharing with clients and people that you work with about the exploration of intimacy and isolation? Because it's almost the perfect opportunity to explore something that we're in such polarity of as far as belief.
Yeah, absolutely. So first things first, I'll share what I've heard so many couples come to me for, which is how the hell do I sit here in this home with my partner and not bite their head off? So for a lot of people, they're in the place of doing damage control right now. For those that might not have been armed with some of the communication skills, because we don't generally have to spend this much time together. And a lot of these issues aren't forced to the surface because we have other things to distract us, like our day jobs and friends and hobbies. And now that all of those things have dissolved away, we're left with the bread and butter, which is all of the issues that have gone unresolved. So first thing I've been sharing with people is how are we creating a space to work through some of those issues that are inevitably coming to the surface. And I'll share an example from my life because I've had to innovate throughout this time. I mean, I am saying this because I've experienced going through all of the tools in my toolbox and thinking, what the hell? I've literally used every tool, now what? And it felt like I was at a breaking point in my relationship throughout this time even. And so I had to get creative. And what I realized during this time is that what was happening in conflict that caused me to shut down and that caused me to go into a freeze response where I would completely go blank and numb is that I didn't feel safe. And yes, I knew cognitively that I was physically safe and that I wasn't going to be harmed physically. But physiologically, my body didn't feel safe to open up and to remain in a place of vulnerability and connection with my partner. So first thing I've been sharing with people is, one, create that sense of safety for yourself. And how I did that was I would immediately lay my hands on my body. And I would let myself know, I'd literally say, as if I were saying to a child, AKA my inner little girl, you're safe, you are safe. And I would say it as many times as I needed to hear it, with no care for what my partner thought. And there were even times when I would go hop into another room and I would wrap my arms around myself and I'd rock my body as if I were rocking a child. And I would say, you are safe, I love you, I've got you. Everything's going to be okay. 4 simple phrases that a child could understand, because we're not in intellectual cognition in these moments of, hijacked amygdalas. So I would grab my arms, crisscrossed arms, and this brings us back to a whole brain state so that we can have, access to more of our cognitive function. And then once we determine that we're safe and once we actually feel safe to proceed, then coming back into the communication with someone and really asking, okay, what is it that I need? What is it that I need right now? And making a clear statement for that. Hey, if we want to proceed in this conversation, what I need right now is for us to lower our voices 3 notches. Is that something that you can agree to? And creating agreement between you and your partner so that there's, 1, you're letting your partner in, there's true intimacy there. And 2, having your partner's agreement as well. So stating your needs and asking your partner what their needs are. Hey, I've shared my needs. What do you need right now? Okay, maybe your partner needs 5 minutes, and honoring your partner's needs if that's something that's amenable for you. And then taking that and moving forward. And so, the safety one is big. Communication is huge and being really clear on needs. And something that's been really helpful for me as well over these last few weeks is really pausing to take a deep breath and letting expression out through sound. So if I know that I am at a boiling point and it's past the point of me saying anything nice, I'll say, you know what, give me a few minutes. I'll go to another room and I will make sounds to express and allow the activation to sort of release from my body so that it's not coming out as spewing words of you did this, I can't believe that, because that's not taking responsibility for my experience. That's blaming my partner. And then moving the body, shaking the body, letting out flutters from the lips, and allowing the energy to sort of move through the body and then revisiting the situation.
Epic. Oh, I thought you're moving. It was behind.
We lost your audio a little bit. So
it's going in slow motion.
Yeah. So we were like,
is she saying something?
Magic.
Yeah.
So, it's such a fascinating process as people enter, and I'll speak for myself, as I entered some of the deeper work around sexuality, sensuality, intimacy, I didn't realize the depth that I had coupled together pain and pleasure in sexuality. Yep. And, there was a point with Ta and I that he even said, when we were having sex together, I would check out. And I would ask for the intensity, but then it was like I would leave my body. And there was some part of me, because of past traumas, that I coupled, and this is very common with traumatic events, I coupled together the pleasure of that sadistic dominance. And the thing was, as I got very clear that as I resolved my medical conditions and that I decided pain was not going to be my mentor anymore. and that I was going to release pain as my best friend, because I had a realization pain is what made me truly feel like I wasn't alone, because that's how isolated I had felt. And there's obviously a lot to that, but for the context of now, when I told myself and started to make decisions based on moving away, of not being in pain, then that also included my sexuality kind of got thrown out, baby in the bathwater, because I hadn't even realized they had been coupled together. And as humans, we couple experiences and sensations together. So I'm so grateful for the work that you're doing with people, the support that you've been for me personally, and especially at a time right now for people to really become consciously aware of what their intimacy is, what their intimacy has been, and what they want their intimacy to look like, or an openness to explore what their intimacy could be.
Absolutely. And it's interesting. I mean, I remember that you and I have spoken about this before, your coupling of pain and pleasure. And I've noticed in many of my own sexual experiences, I had kind of left the building. It looked as if I was there. I was looking into the person's eyes, saying all the right things. And I learned this from porn. I learned how to behave, how to show up, what positions to put my body in, what things to say, what sounds to make everything seem believable in service of my partner's pleasure. And this wasn't in service of my pleasure. And, granted, I experienced a lot of pleasure in my life, and I was not present for a lot of my sexual experiences. And something I discovered the other day is a beautiful technique that really allows our masculine and feminine to meet each other within ourselves. And I'll share that with you all. So I was with my partner the other night, and this was one of the first times in a little bit that we had really created present space for sexual activity. With everything that's been happening, we've really been keeping everything on track with our businesses, with, our health, with our family's health. So our priorities had shifted. And so when we came together the other night, I found that I was tense in my body and that I wasn't present. I was thinking about the things I needed to do after. And I hear this from so many of my clients. They're thinking about their families, the home, something else. And so I met myself in that moment, and in my, with my own masculine energy, I said, I choose to be present. I am choosing to be present. And for a moment that felt constricting for me, because I thought, oh my gosh, well, that must mean I'm wrong right now. If I'm not present, I've got to change. I've got to do something else. And then my feminine side swept in and said, okay, take your time, do it whenever you're ready. And then my masculine came back and said, and know that we've already made the choice to be present. So whenever you're ready, the choice is there. And in the next few minutes, I completely forgot that I'd even had that internal dialogue. And all of a sudden I was present, because there was space for my body to do as it wanted. There was space for my attention to go where it wanted, knowing that I was going to make the choice to be present and be there with my partner. And it was a profound experience to have in that moment that felt both powerful and spacious at the same time.
I love it. So from your perspective, what are some of the things that you invite people to be mindful of right now in this isolation? Because we are creating current conditionings that for some people will extend for years and maybe even the rest of their life. So what are some things that people can be doing now to just to be present and to create intimacy currently, even if they're in isolation?
Yes. So you're right. We are forging a lot of new normals now because we're operating in a completely different paradigm. And who knows what this will look like once we're on the other side of this. So the best, tips that I can give are: one, relentlessly check in with self. Relentlessly ask, what is it that I need? What will allow me to feel safe right now? What is coming up for me and what's underneath that? So really checking in with self. 2, keeping touch alive. If you are home with others, keeping touch alive when it feels appropriate to be in close proximity. Now, again, really honoring your alone time and taking that space for yourself because we're in such close proximity with those we're at home with, and allowing there to be time for affection and physical touch, whether that's with a partner or with other family members, so that our bodies can continue to habituate what it feels like to be in close proximity with people in a loving way. Because a lot of times when we are out and about, when we're meeting up with friends, we're hugging people, we're sitting close to people at dinner, over drinks. We're doing things that allows our human organisms to know that we are in connection. And that is the opposite of what seems to be happening right now. So the more we can stay in close proximity with people while still, honoring our highest health, that's super important. So if there are people in your home that you can pause in the workday and take a hug or have some cuddles, I'd highly recommend it, because the more out of touch, no pun intended, but the more out of touch we get with that, the more our body is going to habituate to being in separation. And then that's what's going to become the new normal once we move into the new normal.
Mm-hmm.
Why are you looking at me?
I don't know. I've been talking a lot.
I'm looking at Lee. She's fine.
If you have a hug for me, I'll take it.
I'm scrolling. Leaning in for it. So, Lee, we do a lot of work with people around intimacy too. And we've established something that we call the roadmap to intimacy. And it starts off with physical tolerance, being able to tolerate yourself in a situation or a proximity, then acceptance of yourself in that situation or proximity, and then be observing to see if you're safe in that space. And when you're safe, you can open yourself up to being vulnerable. And when you're vulnerable, vulnerability usually comes back at you. And once you have vulnerability, it's connection. And when you have connection, you can have an intricate connection. And when you get to that intricacy, that's what I see as intimacy. It's the intricacy of connection. So when it always, like you said, taking it back to what you said before, it always starts off with the individual. And the individual, if an individual doesn't have that intimate connection with themselves, I believe it's very challenging for them to have an intimate connection with other people. And there are a lot of people right now that we know that we are interacting with that are by themselves, completely isolated. What would you recommend for somebody who's by themselves, that isn't with a partner, and that's really having a tough time getting into that space of being able to tolerate the self? Like you were saying at the beginning, people have all this shit that's in the way, that, their jobs and their families and all these distractions, and it pulls them away from that intricate connection with the self. What would you recommend for someone who's smoking, drinking, eating crap in their house right now, bringing their nervous system to a heightened space and decreasing their immune system response because they're in these habits of distracting themselves from that intimacy with themselves? What would you recommend for someone?
That is such a great question, because there are so many that are home by themselves right now. So the first thing is, and this is what I take on as practice anytime there's something that feels like it's ready for a shift, is simply observe. Without trying to change a thing, can we allow ourselves a runway to observe what's happening, with no judgment, with no preconceived notions, with no need to make fixes or adjustments? So say for 3 to 5 days time, can we observe what is happening every time we go to reach for the drink? What is happening every time we go to reach for the bag of chips? What is happening every time we go to reach for our phone or the remote? And can we just observe, okay, how am I feeling right now? What is it that I need? What's coming up for me? Is there something I'd like to be doing instead? And not even needing to make a change necessarily. And even for that 3 to 5 days, if you want to still go and grab for the remote after, grab for the remote, but simply allowing a space, a small space in which there is a question asked that can then, going forward in time, create the possibility for a different choice. And so, you know, it's easy, especially when we haven't learned to create that intimacy with ourselves, to immediately go into self-judgment and self-criticism. But if we can take a step back from that and we can simply observe as the witness, as somebody who's peering in from a window and just watching someone do something with no attachment as to what this person does, then we can start to get curious. And in that space, there's room for curiosity instead of judgment, so that maybe the question arises, oh, this is interesting. I noticed that every time I have, received a text from this person or didn't hear back from this person, that's when I go to reach for the remote. That's when I go to reach for the bottle. And so then we start to collect data. And so having that space allows for other possibilities without us needing to force something out of willpower and determination, because willpower only lasts so long. If we can observe something and allow a bigger space for something else to exist, that's where there's a lot of power.
Thanks for that. And, bringing it back to the data thing, what are your thoughts on journaling with intimacy? Because I believe, I know that, through studies and stuff, well, I don't know, but I've heard through studies and stuff that human beings tend to have about 60,000 thoughts a day. Mm-hmm. And so when these feelings and sensations come up, we can have them, we can think about it, we can do all the observation thing, and then it can slide off to the side and be forgotten about. What are your views on journaling with creating intimacy with the self?
Abso-freaking-lutely. That is my view.
Okay.
I would highly, highly, highly recommend it. I can't tell you how powerful of a practice journaling has been for me and for every single client that I've ever recommended it to, every friend, every family member. Because as much as we like to think that everything is staying stored in our heads and we have an accurate depiction of what's happening over time, we do not. Our memory is highly skewed, and this database is not accurate. And so if we can create a system of documentation that works well for us, it doesn't have to be using someone's template. When I don't feel like writing out journaling, I'll use voice memos. I will use whatever it takes for me to document that moment so that I could go back to it and really understand what was happening then for me. So voice memos, pen and paper journaling, a notepad on your phone, Evernote, any of the apps that you love, writing on a Post-it note, writing on the mirror. Anything that works for you is a great way to be able to track something over time. And it's a great way to really be able to celebrate your progress, because that's one of the big things here. Documentation is great for us to see where we can make improvements. It's also amazing for us to be able to celebrate and look back and say, wow, look how far I've come. That's the juice in all of this.
Yeah. I think that's the juiciest part, man. Every week I go back a week. Every week I go back 2 weeks. Every month I go back a month. And then every 6 months I go back 6 months and I do my whole journals. And then every year I go back 2 years. So I read my journals from end to end, and to see where I am and to see if there are any nuggets in there that make sense, because there are certain things that happen in the present moment with me that they always come back later. When I go back to my journal, I'm like, oh shit, this makes so much sense. And it just snaps everything into place. And it gives me this intricate connection with myself that I didn't realize that I had. And for me, that's that intimacy with myself. And there have been things in my relationship with Cole, right, that have affected me as an individual, and me having that connection with my journal, my feelings on it, if I was ready to run, if I was hiding something or whatever it is, if I wasn't acting a certain way, or if I was, or how I felt, I can go back to these things and can reconnect and see if I can conjure those feelings up and see if I still feel the same way or if things have changed. And for me, that intricacy is how I'm able to be intimate with myself. And then I can bring my full, intimate, connected self with myself to this situation here, or a situation with you, or whoever else I'm intimate with, So I thank you for co-signing that. I appreciate that, because that's something that I work with my clients very closely as journaling. So thank you for the co-sign.
Yeah. Hell yeah. I got you.
Yeah.
So Lee, for anyone listening right now that maybe they're surrounded by people, maybe they're still feeling very isolated in spite of being surrounded by people, if they were to stand in front of the mirror, what are some questions that they could ask themselves to explore intimacy from your perspective, since this is Mentor in the Mirror podcast?
I love it. Oh my gosh. I am such a fan of mirror work, first of all. And I know y'all are huge proponents of it. It is super powerful. So for anyone listening who has not tried or explored mirror work, I highly recommend it. And Ta and Cole have plenty of amazing resources on mirror work. So here's what I would recommend. First off, keep it simple. Looking in the mirror and saying, "Hi, how are you?" We often ask people that question superficially, either waiting to get through the answer so we can speak, or not really listening truly for how they are. And a lot of times we'll say, "Oh, I'm good. How about you?" And maybe we're not good. Maybe we're really feeling challenged by something. So looking in the mirror and saying, "Hey, how are you?" And then following that up with, "No, really, how are you?" Asking the double question to get one layer deeper and saying, "What lit you up about today? What felt challenging about today?" And starting with questions that feel accessible, because a lot of people haven't had the great fortune of doing mirror work, and it can feel pretty intense at first to be there with yourself in a way that maybe people haven't been with themselves before. So asking any question that will allow you to feel at ease in your body and come back home to yourself while gazing at yourself in the eyes. And then following that line of questioning intuitively. And this is a question I always ask myself, and I always invite clients to ask themselves, is, what do I need right now? Especially while all of this is happening, and even before this, we weren't taught how to reconcile or communicate our needs. So what do I need right now? That might be as easy as, I need to sit down on this toilet because I got to pee. Or I need to go get a glass of water. Or I really need to reach out to a friend because I am in a place of suffering right now, and I really need someone on the other end of that phone to walk me through this. And when we ask that question, it creates a space for possibility for us to acknowledge that it's okay that we have needs, and it's okay that we get them met, and that we make requests for those needs to be met. So what do I need? What would light me up right now? What do I want to contribute to someone right now? So if we're beyond the place of getting our needs met, what can I contribute? What can I contribute to myself? What can I contribute to others? Who do I want to reach out to? And then following the line of question intuitively and taking the time to ask questions that maybe we'd want to know from ourselves that we haven't taken the time to inquire.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's Noto, a lot we actually in a short period of time brought, I think, a lot of acquisition maybe too. Well, we'll see how it goes. Lee, where can people get in touch with you if they would like to explore further about intimacy, or what intimacy is, or what it could be? What's the best way to reach you?
Yes. So the best way to reach me is at untamedintimacy.com. And I'm super excited to share that I'm going to be launching a free masterclass this Saturday, April 4th at 3 p.m. Central Time. And so if any of this piques your interest, and I'm sure it does, then join me there, because I'm going to be doing a deep dive into what creates untamed intimacy and how to create that in your relationship now, especially during this time. And then, of course, you can find me on Facebook, Lee Noto, and Instagram at @LeeNoto_. I would love to hear from you all.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And before we go, I want to give a special shout out to one of our listeners. Her name is Margie Rojas, and she follows us on Instagram. She listens to all the podcasts. She's watching right now on Facebook. Thank you for your support. We really, really appreciate you, and we appreciate you checking in and all the feedback that you've given us, sister. Thank you for who you are and what you are, and thank you for taking all of the information in that we've been delivering. We really appreciate you. And so I just wanted to say that. And thank you, Noto, for joining us and for being so beautiful. My gosh, you're so easy to look at. And
thank you.
and for being so brilliant. I love how my conversations with you have been epic every time. So thank you so much. I love you tremendously. My name is Ta.
My name is Cole.
We are Ta Cole, and this is the Mentor in the Mirror podcast. If you love this, and we know you did, please rate, review, subscribe, share it with a friend. Tag us on Instagram, and yeah, man.
And all that jit. I would say almost all that jazz. That almost came
Anyways,
out. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening, watching, and all that jazz.
We love you.
Be free.